Home canning is easy and lots of fun. Sales for canning products increased by 30% last year because so many people are getting into growing their own food. Now, molds, bacteria, and fungi are very prevalent. They're on all food, they're in the air, and many of these are beneficial, but others are harmful. During the canning process, food's going to be exposed to sufficient heat to destroy any harmful microorganisms that could cause food spoilage. Don't use canned goods if they're cloudy, foamy, off color, or have an odor. You can store canned goods for up to a year. You want to follow recipes carefully, and don't adjust sugar, vinegar, or salt amounts in recipe, as this could lead to food spoilage. Use a 5% acidity white vinegar and use canning salt in recipes that need salt because it's processed without caking agents and iodine. Those agents can cause problems with color and the crispness of your finished products. Now, certain foods like okra, carrots, green beans, and asparagus are considered low-acid foods, and they have to be cooked in a steam pressure canner at 240 degrees to avoid things like botulism. With sufficient vinegar added, as in pickling, you can process some of those items in a water bath canner at 212 degrees. So what we're going to discuss today is using the water bath canner. And you need a large enough canner or stock pot to cover the jars with at least an inch of water when you're processing so that sufficient water can cover the jars to allow good circulation and kill bacteria. Now, a canning jar stock pot is going to come with a rack that holds your jars up off the bottom, but you could also use a stock pot and use a cake rack in the bottom to get the same results. You can also buy, for smaller amounts of canning, little plastic containers like this that will fit in a stock pot if you're doing the half-pint jars. Now, the jars you'll use will come in half-pint, pint, or quart sizes, and these jars are made with special threads to allow them to seal properly with the home canning screw bands and lids. It's important to make sure your jars have no nicks or chips in the necks of the jars because that can affect sealing. The jars can be reused many times, but the lids cannot. And the lids will come in both wide mouth and standard size. So the process of canning is really quite simple once you get used to it. You'll wash your jars, lids, and bands in hot soapy water and rinse them well. And it's important to keep the jars warm until you're ready to use them. So I put them in the simmering water bath and heat them and then turn them upside down on a towel until I'm ready to use them. And then when it's time, you want to fill your canner half full with enough water to cover your jars with at least an inch of water. And then fill your prepared jars with your prepared food. And I use a canning funnel to make that a lot easier. And then you'll want to get any airspace out of the jars, any air that's collected in the jars. And so you use a non-metallic spatula. You don't want to scratch the inside of the jars with something metal. And because air bubbles inside the jars can affect the canning. And each recipe will call for a specific head space, the open space between the top of the food and the top of the jar. And this canning spatula actually has increments on it that will help you measure the correct head space. So that's very handy. And then wipe your jars. And I put the jar rings in the simmering water bath to process those and get them ready for the canning. And this is a really handy jar lid rack, and a metallic lid lifter helps you to set the canning lids right on the jars without burning your fingers, because that was always something I didn't like doing with canning before. And then you'll put the bands on the jars. You'll wipe the jar lids with a wet cloth before you put the lids on. And put that ring on just finger tight. Don't overly tighten because that can affect the sealing process. And then these jars are going to be hot, so you lift them with a jar lifter. And you want something that has plastic, again, so it's not scratching the jars. Put that into your water bath, and again, you want at least an inch of water over the top of the jars. So again, you can use your metal spatula, your non-metallic spatula, to check the head space. And then you'll cover this canning pot with a lid and turn it up to a boil. Once it comes to a steady boil, then you start the processing time. So it's important to have a timer and process the jars for a certain amount of time. Larger jars are going to need more canning time. Once it reaches the end of the canning time, remove the lid, turn the heat off, and allow the jars to set for 5 minutes. And then take the jars out and put them on your towel and leave them for 12 hours. Don't retighten the bands. And after 12 hours, you can check the seal to make sure that it's good seal. A seal that pops like this is not well sealed, and the jar will have to be used immediately. It can be refrigerated and used immediately. The jars can be stored up for a year. The bands should be removed and wiped to make sure there's no water caught under them. Enjoy some home canning and have a lot of fun with it. I'm Trisha Shirey for Backyard Basics.